From the top.
From the top.
From the top.
Let's go.
Wes Moe.
No. No.
Welcome back to 6-Minute Increments, where we look at the interplay between law, business, finance, and today our special guest is our very own partner, Bridget Kehm. Welcome, Bridget, finally, to making it to 6-Minute Increments.
Finally, 11 years in the making.
Yes.
11 years in the making. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, what your practice area is, what you're doing here?
Absolutely. So I'm Bridget Kehm, born and raised right here in Rochester.
Greece, New York.
Greece,
That's
New
right.
York, West Side. Went to undergrad in Buffalo, law school in Syracuse, where I also got my master's in public administration.
What is that for people who don't know?
Yeah, so it's kind of like an MBA, but for the not-for-profit and government sector. So a lot of organizational management, finance, learning how government functions, learning how nonprofits run is the most common use of that degree. So it's kind of interplayed in my practice. I do have a particular interest in not-for-profit organizations, but my practice...
Especially for animals. Well, that's just your personal side.
Yeah, it's personal interest in animals. But my personal and professional practice sort of spans across industries between corporate transactional, healthcare, commercial real estate, a lot of financing work for our organizations, whether it be in the healthcare space or the nonprofit space. So getting funding, getting grants, typical contract lawyer.
Now, with nonprofits, I mean, over the years, I've had a lot of clients show up. What is the most common thing that you hear when somebody says, I want to form a nonprofit? What are they showing up, telling you, talking about? What are you counseling or advising them on? What are the risks?
Yes. So a lot of people don't know that, you need to have a board of directors, that you need at least 3 people. We have a lot of organizations that come to us where it's family members looking to sit on the board. That could also raise some conflict of interest principles depending on what the organization does. A lot of organizations come to us with limited budget, which is expected, but having to go out and seek funding from other sources to be able to make an organization run, because you still need money to run an organization, whether it's, an animal shelter, nursing home, you need it. So a lot of times we have people coming with sort of passion projects that they're looking to start, looking to do community-based activities. I try to counsel, are there other organizations in the area that are similar to something that you'd like to do?
Clients usually don't like that.
They do not like that answer.
Because mine's special.
Yes, everything is special, but trying to look to see, is there something that you could partner with another organization? Because once you start this not-for-profit, this is going to continue on beyond you. So trying to plan for when you no longer want to run this organization or be a board member, trying to find others that can help expand the life of it, because you form this, it's living and breathing. It's not just going to die when you want to stop it.
Can anyone just go get whatever you need from New York State to be a nonprofit organization?
So it depends on if there's any sort of restricted activity that you need a departmental consent, a state consent for. But yeah, I mean, you can go and
What's a restricted activity? I don't know what that is.
Yeah. So if you wanted to do anything related to the healthcare space, you might need a license to do it. If you education,
religion,
exactly.
Those are big ones.
Yes. So depending on what the type of purpose of organization you want to form, you can go and file your certificate of incorporation with New York State. But that's sort of only step one of it. There's also working through with the IRS in order to get federal tax exempt status.
That's the part I think that most people don't completely understand. They've heard the name 501c3.
Yes.
How much time do you spend? And maybe you can explain.
And that's an IRS designation. That's not
in
New York State. Yes.
That's the good old fashioned Uncle Sam.
Exactly. So there is the IRS designation application that you have to, prove that you are, a public charity is sort of the most common word and phrase for an organization for what you would be doing. There is private foundation status, which really just looks at where you're getting your funds from. Is it something that's a public donated? Is it something that's grant funding? Is it something that it's just your own, personal wealth that you're looking to grant out to other organizations. So we have a lot of organizations come to us as that public charity 501c3.
So, just so I'm understanding and following along, it's possible for me to get approval from New York State to be a nonprofit, but that doesn't necessarily mean I will get approval to be a 501c3.
Correct.
So there are quote unquote nonprofits out there who are not 501c3 tax exempt organizations.
In a way, yes. Making sure that you're going through and filing the application with the IRS. If you're looking to solicit funds in New York State or own property in New York State, you also have to go get an approval and register with the Charities Bureau in order to solicit funds. So there's sort of 3 different layers at a minimum of registration that needs to happen with the Department of State to form your entity, with the IRS to get federal tax exempt status, and with the Charities Bureau to solicit funds from New York residents.
So is the IRS tough about handing those out, those 501c3s?
It depends. Sometimes
What a lawyerly answer.
I know.
Because I'm thinking I can just go get this and now, I don't have to pay taxes on property that I buy. And like, how do
Would
you
you
stop
recommend that, Bridget?
I would not recommend just going out and applying, because there are penalties in the event that you obtain federal tax exempt status, but then don't fulfill, the purpose of what you obtained it for. If you're using it for a personal interest, you hear private interment, private benefit, you can't use your organization to further personal interests. So the IRS and the Attorney General will come and impose fines on you and take away your status.
Okay, so say I want to knit blankets and give those blankets to people who need blankets. I can just
Noble cause.
I can go get a nonprofit 501c3 and knit blankets and give them away and get all the protections of a 501c3.
Usually not recommended for that.
Well,
Well, I think this goes to where a lot of people, and over the years, I too have had people show up looking to form a nonprofit and not really thinking through. And I think this is where Bridget's MPA comes in. The governance, the maintenance, who owns this entity isn't you, and what's the charitable purpose.
okay.
And then there are multiple government agencies. I mean, over the years, we've run into the Attorney General, the Charities Bureau,
Department of Education.
Department of Health. There are lots of regulatory overlay.
Mm-hmm.
And then you need lawyers and legal counsel, and a lot of people are surprised by that, especially like that animal services world where people care. And then, are you cheap, Bridget? I mean, you cost some money.
Yes.
Right.
Yes, that's also the other struggle with organizations that are starting up. They don't always want to spend the money on professional services, because they're like, well, I have
Mission.
a few $1,000s set aside. I need to spend that directly on the mission of the organization.
So they expect to get an accountant on their board, a lawyer on their board, others, and then in the hopes that they render those services for free.
Yes, which is good to have people like that sitting on your board, but they're sitting on your board in that capacity for the organization. They're not sitting on the board to be your personal accountant, to be your personal attorney. And there are ethical rules that follow, at least from the lawyer profession, that, you're sitting in like your personal capacity only. You're not supposed to provide and counsel the organization. Some organizations will try to, use you to issue spot. But usually any attorney sitting on the board will say, I think these are issues. We should go check with the organizational attorney to vet them through.
And usually that's one of those costs that I think the organization thinks they're going to save. And then what happens is the lawyers are pointing out more times to go to legal counsel than the organization anticipated. And then they try to get you off the board. From that counseling perspective, with a new group of people who wanted to come in and form a nonprofit, like where do you begin?
I usually will try to start in the beginning, even helping them craft their mission statement, outline the purposes of the organization. Usually any new client that comes to me, I send them an info sheet to help, gauge interest, who's going to be sitting on the board? Are there any relationships among them? What are you actually looking to accomplish in the short term, in the long term? How much money are you expecting to bring in? Do you have the next few years budgeted out between both income and expenses, because that determination also helps me determine whether or not I need to file the long form 1023 or whether it's just the shorter form, which some organizations are surprised by the long form 1023 because it's very lengthy and detailed. It doesn't always apply 100% to the organization in terms of all the schedules that are listed there, but you send them the 1023 and they're like, whoa, what is this? And then you look at the 1023 easy, and it's much shorter, much condensed, taking statements on, essentially that everything you're writing is true, without all of the supporting information that the 1023 asks for.
And I know over the years, a big element, New York State has pushed it. It comes up a lot. Conflicts of interest. What is a conflict of interest, and how do you counsel clients to maybe not do that?
Yes. So there's a few different types of conflicts generally. You can have a personal conflict. You can have a financial conflict. So a lot of times we see organizations, another phrase is a related party transaction. So you're sitting on the board, but you own a construction company.
Mm-hmm.
And the nonprofit needs to build a new wing onto
You sit on the
building.
board and you're the lawyer and they want to use your law firm.
Yes.
Right.
So looking at, sort of setting aside the conflicted person should step aside while the rest of the board members discuss. Is it something that's fair and reasonable and in the best interest of the organization? Is it something that you're getting, fair market value rates? Or is it something that you're looking to funnel money towards the conflicted individual? At that point, you might have a private benefit, private interment issue on hand.
And what do you counsel? How does an organization deal with that? I mean, if they're a mature organization, they're building a construction project, you're in this, are they just not supposed to work with that company, or what's the plan?
Yeah. So usually there are, you have a conflict of interest policy for the organization. It outlines specific rules that you're supposed to follow that are statutory, along with what the IRS requires. So looking at, going out and seeking bids, making sure that you have looked at alternatives, and that if you're going to go forward with a potential conflict situation, that it's at least been vetted in the proper channels, and it turns out that it's the same as you would have received elsewhere. So it's key to make sure that you have explored alternatives. Sometimes safest to go with an unrelated type of transaction just from the pure optics of it. But depending on if you've followed all of the letter of the law for, is this something that's actually approvable or is this something that's prohibited? You should look at all of that and have, your attorney vet it as well.
Now, over the years, I've had the benefit, I guess, too, of working with both private, nonprofit entities and actually public companies.
Mm-hmm.
I've always said that I found the hardest part for new startup nonprofits is that the governance aspect, the closest thing I can say is what you would expect to see if you were a publicly traded
Yeah.
NASDAQ, New York Stock Exchange entity in terms of minutes and governance. To what extent do you get involved working with boards or helping in that board development, board training? Do you recommend that they get lawyers? For the more experienced entity that's trying to take itself to the next level, how do you counsel them?
Exactly. I've had a few experienced nonprofit organizations come to me seeking this board development. So we've put together sort of board manuals, if you will, so that each director can sort of understand, okay, what are their duties as directors? What are the actual laws and policies that they need to follow? What are the committees and what do the committees do? Making sure that everybody understands each layer of the organization and what their duties are supposed to be. That helps make sure that things run smoothly. There's board training and development that outside consultants come in and help run through, how meetings should work. We've provided templates and sort of guidance for clients for how meetings could be run. And then obviously working with the organization for their own specific interests that they have.
And do they each need bylaws, articles of incorporation? So if I come to you, soup to nuts, understanding there's a range, just so people know, what is the cost in fees for all the legal work involved with getting a nonprofit approved and getting all of these structural things set up? What does that run somebody to?
Good legal answer coming, I can tell.
Yes. It does vary depending on the size of the organization.
I knew it. I'm going to make you give us numbers,
I know.
though.
I can give numbers. So for organizations that have to file the long form 1023, you're looking at about $700 in filing fees alone.
Okay.
That's the fees to New York State, and that's the fee to the IRS and the fee to the Charities Bureau. For legal time, it can really depend on how much hand holding, so to say, has to be done. If it's an organization that comes to me with everything,
And how many layers of other
Exactly.
entities. If you're in education, healthcare, religion, you're going to multiple entities
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
versus knitting.
Knitting
Yes.
blankets for people who want blankets.
Right.
Yes.
Yes.
So I mean, it is a several $1,000s, legal process in order to get something, off
Like
the
four
ground.
figures, 5 figures.
I would say it can depend and range. You might be able to get some through in the few thousand. You might be up to 10, depending on how complex it can be.
Okay.
And how many rounds of questioning the IRS.
Does that shock a lot of people?
It does. It does.
That's
shock a
why
lot
I
of people.
wanted to address that
Yes.
so people understand the investment up front.
Yes.
And the entity's supposed to outlive them. So if you
Right.
have this purpose, and then you get involved because of our experience with the healthcare space, you get unique ones like, say, a federally qualified health center. What's the nuance, I guess, with the FQHC?
Yes. So they are essentially your primary care practice in underserved areas. They do have to coordinate essentially all the specialty services that a person could need. Eye care, OBGYN services. But the unique aspect of them is on their board, there needs to be people from the patient population that they serve. So that also can shock some people because, the patient is sitting there, but they can provide valuable insight in how the organization could be run or should be run. But there is regulations from the feds, from HRSA, making sure that your scope of project, what you're supposed to be doing, but then also looking at the board that has patients on it.
So say I start a nonprofit and it's not what I thought it would be, and I want to wind that sucker down.
Yes.
What's involved with, can you just,
Even more.
Yes.
seriously? Can you
it-
just shelve it? It exists, but it's shelved, or do you have to affirmatively
So
shut it down?
you should shut it down. If you have something formed, and if you fail to file your 990s, there's different levels of 990s depending on how much
And that's the tax
you bring.
return?
That's the tax return.
Okay.
So there's the 990, the 990 Easy, and the 990N, which is used for smaller organizations. But if you fail to file, your federal tax exempt status can get taken away, and then you get posted on the revocation list. So your organization still exists. You're still supposed to file things each year,
Oh, even if
Um,
you did nothing.
even if you did nothing.
Okay.
And then depending on dissolution, do you have assets? Do you not have assets? Where are they supposed to go? That's usually outlined in your organizing documents.
Okay.
That it's supposed to go to another organization, another 501c3, governmental organization.
And who's watching as you do this?
What do you mean?
Well, as you go to leave, you have to actually contact the Attorney General's office
Yes.
and the Charities Bureau.
Yes,
So you
will.
have government watchdog.
What if I
Exactly.
die? Is it my estate's problem then, or?
Well, you have to have that board.
Yes, the board can fill the vacancy. If you
Got
were
it.
on the board and somebody passes away, there are specific rules for filling vacancies on the board, and when sort of the term of the person stepping into the seat to fill it. So it's not necessarily flowing through to your personal estate
Got it.
because it's separate from you.
What about, a big thing on board governance is people understanding fiduciary duties, what it means to be a fiduciary. And then sometimes organizations, they bring people on to get donations. They try to take out and go and create this, we'll call it the executive committee.
Mm-hmm.
What do you counsel and advise about that and the interplay with fiduciary duties?
Sure. So fiduciary duties, the reasonably prudent person standard, making sure that the organization interests are put first before your personal interests, making sure that you're doing things that further organization, not further personal. So executive committees can form and be functioned. For boards that have a lot of board members, it's easier to have the executive committee meet between your scheduled board meetings. The executive committee does have all action and authority of the board. Generally, it can be restricted, whether it's in the charter or the bylaws, and then so long as it's not doing something that's prohibited by law. But sometimes you'll have the executive committee run through personal agendas, and then that's sort of going against the organizational purpose. So as board members being engaged, raising issues that you see, because again, if you see something and don't say something, that's usually a nod to the prohibited activity. So making sure that you're being vocal if you see something.
What should a board member do if they think they see something? The executive committee's going off, they think it's wrong. What should a board member do at that point?
So sometimes there are, it depends on what the actual
The
thing.
lawyer
I know.
answers.
Is it something that could, be under a whistleblower protection? Is it something that's being engaged in a illegal activity? There are whistleblower policies and procedures that organizations do implement, but raising it to the disinterested individuals, again, that can sort of create like a coup of the interested people versus the rest, but making sure that you're getting everybody sort of together to discuss and halt the prohibited activity, making sure that you're following those policies and procedures. Because again, if you know something's occurring and you don't say something, then that could come back to you personally.
How about, organizations such as a homeowners association? I mean, how is that organized and structured?
So they are not-for-profit organizations, but it's not the public
That's
charity.
where the fighting begins.
I did not know that.
Yes, it's
Yeah.
not the public charity 501c3 designation. There's several other different types of 501c organizations. So think of like your chambers of commerce, your homeowners associations, your
Elks
public
Club.
charities. Yes.
Colleges, universities.
Exactly. So there are other rules that apply to them. They are federally tax exempt, but it's not something that you can necessarily have like a tax deductible contribution to. But they are still function as boards that have to meet. You get more policies and procedures related to the public appearance of the community for HOAs, but that's about the unique aspect of it.
One last thing, I guess you raised it. It's a great point and a great topic. 'Cause a lot of people don't understand. I donated to Beth's knitting. I'm going to take a tax exempt donation. What are the rules sort of around for the person who wants to claim they made a tax deduction? What should they expect? What should they be getting to make sure they understand? Is this really a charitable donation?
Yes. So there are.
'Cause then you get the IRS.
Yes, there are several ways that you can vet an organization that you're looking to give money to that are publicly available. You can check the tax exempt status on the IRS's website to see whether or not it's actually status is.
They have a search database on
They
the
do have a
website?
search database that you can search based on organization name or employer identification number, which is like the social security number for an organization.
Mhm.
So you can use those search functions to actually confirm that the status is valid. If it's a New York-based organization, the Charities Bureau also has a similar search option for you to go to see, are they registered with the Charities Bureau? You can sort of take those two different search functions, and then if you're looking in a different state, obviously there's other state organizations that have similar functions.
Lines.
I know,
What
crossing
a
state
fun
lines.
time.
But you can confirm the status of the organization through those means. Usually, if you donate and give money, you get some sort of letter back that says you've contributed. And so keeping the receipts of that and handing it over to your trusted accountant for record keeping purposes.
Well, because this is a very expensive hour and there's three of us literally
Yes.
billing,
Yes.
we wanted to take your time. Thank you very much for coming today. As always, there's a lot to cover here. There's even more that we could talk to you about, but it can't be triple billing, for God's sakes.
Can't. We'll
No.
have you back.
We'll have you back
Yes.
for
Yes.
more.
Always more to discuss.
So please like, share, and follow us for more. Thank you.
Thank you.